My name is Jaafar Almusaad. I am a co-founder and CTO of a startup called Rexsmart. Rexsmart is a PropTech marketplace that will connect property buyers, property sellers, and service providers all under one place. And obviously, we use AI in different parts of the process, including the first part, which is the property valuation. So AI is nothing new, really. We have been hearing about it maybe since the Terminator movie during the late 80s and early 90s. And I remember back then how fascinated I was with how intelligent the robots and capable they were. But in reality, AI did not quite work that well, and for reasons, obviously. And in the next few minutes, we'll be exploring why AI did not work that well and what has changed recently, why AI is back to the scene. And to start with, if you look at this diagram here, that's how AI was generally before July 2017. And if you look at the diagram here, this is a typical generative AI model. By generative, I mean this is the AI that accepts a sentence, for example, and it spits out the next word. It predicts the next word in the conversation. So you have the input layer, that's the input, obviously, and you have a bunch of hidden layers, and then the output layer is just one word, the next word. And what's interesting here is the back arrows that you can see on the diagram. So you have a sense that something has to finish before something else has to start, because this introduces a dependency. So the input depends on the output, in this case within the same layer. That's actually why they call this recurrent neural network. And before 2017 variants of this RNNs, recurrent neural networks, were actually kind of state of the art. Now, the problem is because of this dependency, it doesn't matter how many servers, how many accelerators, how many GPUs you might have, you can't use them. You can only use one because this part of the process is sequential, unfortunately. And because of this impacted performance, and obviously, as a result, data scientists had to kind of make the models smaller in size. By size, I mean fewer parameters. You see all the circles here in the diagram, they represent parameters. It means the models were less capable, if you will. They also had to narrow the scope. So you have a model that specializes in, for example, financial conversation. Another model is specialized in socials, in cooking, and so on and so forth. So you couldn't have a model that can't very well handle any types of conversations. This has changed since July 2017. And what you see in this diagram, I know it's very complex. I'm not going to go through it, but this is a new way of building AI models. And what we are interested in is that there are no back arrows in this case. So there's no dependency, there's no serialization, which means if you have 100 servers, 100 GPUs, 1,000 accelerators, you can actually use at least most of them, if not all of them, to train a model, which means now we can train models much, much, much faster than before, which creates new opportunities. Now we can make models a lot bigger. And because they are a lot bigger, they can be trained with more data, more generic data. So you don't have to have that kind of very specific, narrow AI. This is called the transformer. So this is something, actually, if you are interested in, it's something Google came up with. It was a research paper. So they were trying to work around the limitations of the previous AI models. They are in recurrent neural networks. So they came up with this, what they call the transformers model. This was hugely successful, and everybody knows ChatGPT, or OpenAI ChatGPT is actually based on this type of AI, not the previous one. There are some challenges, at least to SMEs. I mean, to train these large models, you need hardware, of course, and in this case, a lot of hardware. And what you see here is Nvidia is a company that makes hardware, AI accelerators. So this is their flagship accelerator, the H100. If you look at the price tag of this one, you can see it's not very SMEs friendly, the least to say. It's quite expensive, and that's just the price of one of these. The company is set to sell, I think, over 500,000 this year, and they also consume a lot of power, so much power, about 700 watt each. So combined, this model alone is going to consume almost 400 megawatt of power just to train some models. Obviously, this is way beyond any SME. But it's not all doom and gloom. Fortunately, there are good news. SMEs can still take advantage of these large models through two ways. I mean, the first way is to use API. So companies like OpenAI and others, they provide what I call AI as a service, essentially. So all you have to do is just subscribe to their service. They will give you some keys, not physical keys, obviously, kind of passwords. So from your system, you can send requests, you can send a customer query, for example, and you get the answer and present that to the customer. So this is very simple, straightforward. I think most web developers are familiar with working with APIs. There is another option as well, which is to take one of these pre-trained models and use them internally. There is a website called, I believe, Hugging Face. And if you visit that website, you'll see there are thousands and thousands of pre-trained models. It's good that many organizations take the headache and bear the cost of training these large models, and they share them. There's some kind of competition, if you will. Everybody wants to show that their models are better than the others. And for us, the good news is we can always use these models for free. Well, we can download them for free, at least. Of course, now there are two approaches. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each. So using API, so using services from companies like OpenAI, it means the initial cost is very low. You subscribe, you pay very little, I guess, to get these API keys, and then you can start to use the service very quickly. It's very fast to deploy, and it's also very simple to deploy. You don't need data scientists to do this for you. There are caveats, unfortunately, because the more you use, the more you have to pay, obviously. So because these are API calls. So if your type of business is the one that generates kind of queries to customers for free, maybe to attract visitors to your website, keep in mind, these free visitors, free customers are going to cost you a lot of money, because the more queries they send through your website, well, the more you have to pay to OpenAI or whoever your service provider. They are inflexible, means that's an API, you use it the way it is. There is very little you can change it, which means everyone is using the same API, so there is hardly any competitive advantage. Just use it because everyone else is doing this. And more importantly, I think, is privacy challenges, because if you need to deal with sensitive customer queries, for example, this information needs to be transmitted to third party. I believe they are probably in the United States, so maybe customer information are transmitted, stored temporarily, and processed by third parties. This creates a lot of privacy challenges at the very least. The other option is to use some pre-trained models, which means you go to Hugging Face or other websites, download a pre-trained model and host it in your own servers, or it could be on the cloud, but a cloud that you own and you control. So there are no third parties that will receive and process the data. What does this give you? Obviously, because you have downloaded the models, now you can do stuff with it. First, you can feed it with your customer data. That's an advantage. And also you can fine-tune the model. So you take a pre-trained model, you don't need a huge amount of resources. So fine-tuning is you train the model just with the data set that you have internally, just to make it more customized, more tailored to your customer needs. It's obviously privacy friendly because, as we said, the customer data does not need to be shared with third parties. The downside is obviously there is higher initial cost, which means you need to have the hardware and the resources to host these models. They're big, so if you want to host a bigger model, obviously you need to have a bunch of servers, and you need to have someone who can do that. This is not simple. This is not web development task. This is more data, machine learning engineering. So you need to have the expertise in-house actually to do this, or you need to hire some consultants to do this work. Of course, there are pros and cons to each approach, and there is no perfect solution. It's part of life. So how do compare and contrast the two approaches using API or using a pre-trained model? I think there are two things in my mind. The competitive advantage is the first one, is you need to ask yourself, is AI something really critical to your business? Or is it just a box you need to tick to impress customers and investors, maybe, or because everyone is using AI and ChatGPT, so you don't want to appear backdated or old-fashioned? If this is the case, then probably it's just easier to use an API. The other thing is, I think, is privacy. So if part of your service is you need to, let's say, answer customer queries, which are specific to each customer, means their data need to be part of the query, then I think APIs is pretty much not an option, or it's going to be very challenging at the very least. So you are likely probably want to use a pre-trained model hosted in your systems, on your servers, whether on-prem or on the cloud, retrain it, fine-tune it, and just make it your own, really. Just to recap, AI has really transformed since July 2017, thanks to the research paper from Google team, which made it public. Everybody can just go and read it. Nvidia is making the hardware. Obviously, there are other companies that are also making AI accelerators, but I would say Nvidia is way more mature, and they were prepared for this to happen. So when it happens, they were there immediately to provide the necessary resources. Of course, training large models is prohibitively expensive to most, if not SMEs, but the good news is you can always have access to these large models either via APIs, or perhaps you can just download a pre-trained model for free and host it internally. There are pros and cons to both approaches, so it all depends on how privacy is important to your business and how genuinely you need AI to be part of your work.